Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Joe Find, and Howard is not here, so I'll be conducting the meeting today. And so let's see, we'll start off with any announcements. Does anyone have any announcements for the club? Okay. Oh, there's an announcement. Okay.
Historic Hawaii is going to do a tour of a historic home in Historic Hawaii Foundation is doing a tour of an historic home in Nu'uanu. It's John and Terry Finney's home, and it's like right on the edge of the Nu'uanu stream, and they also have a Y in their property. So it's kind of interesting because they'll do like a little bit of a history of the Nu'uanu Valley and then have a tour of their house. And she has a lot of great stories to tell. So if you guys are interested, just look on the website, Historic Hawaii Foundation.
Website for that? AIA?
No, Historic Hawaii Foundation.
Historic Hawaii.
All right, thank you.
Sounds like a present.
And are there any new guests today? No new guests? Okay, and I see the pool, the game of chance is... Yes, yeah. And I see the pool is empty. No takers on the pool. Okay. All right, and as far as the joke of the week, right, doesn't have something, all right.
You know the story about manners? Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, after he finished his tour of the White House, he went out, he left the country, took a vacation, went abroad. He was in London. He happened to meet Kaiser Wilhelm. Kaiser said to Teddy Roosevelt, you know, we should get together and we should get to know each other better. I'm sure we have a lot to talk about. Come around to my hotel tomorrow afternoon, be there at 2 o'clock sharp. I can only give you 45 minutes. Teddy was imperious as anybody. He said, I'll be there at 2 o'clock sharp. Unfortunately, I can only spare you half an hour.
Thank you. Today we're going to hear about Kalaupapa, and Gary is going to introduce today's guest.
Okay, everybody. Very fortunate to have a good friend of mine, Janice Marsters. She's been living in Hawaii for about 20 years now. I think I've known her almost all that time, especially when she was with Masa Fujioka. She graduated from BS and MS from the Technical University of Nova Scotia, which is in Halifax. And I was telling her that my old company, EarthTech, had an office there, so I did visit Halifax. What a beautiful city. Beautiful place. She got her PhD in geophysics. Her BSMS was in civil engineering, and then her PhD from UH was in geophysics. She's going to be talking to us about a very interesting project, more an interesting place, mainly because of Michener's Hawaii is a historic site, of course. And I did do a project all by myself. I did a structural assessment of the St. Philomena Church, which was Father Damien's church. I spent about 5 days, a whole week at Kalaupapa, as guest of the National Park Service. And so I'm pretty sure Janice did find the place very, very interesting also. Not just the project, which is very interesting alone, but the place is very interesting. So, Janice?
Thank you, Gary. Well, thank you for inviting me to speak. Gary talked about the beauty of Kalaupapa, and I consider it such a privilege to have been able to spend time there. I actually have started spending time at Kalaupapa way before this project started. I've spent 2 weeks there, or a week there on 2 occasions, doing habitat restoration work with the botanists there as part of a Sierra Club program that we have to take college kids to neighbor islands to do service work. So I was quite familiar with Kalaupapa over a period of years, and it has changed quite a bit. The first time I was there was probably about 18 years ago, and it's such a unique culture, and the culture and everything that happens there is, for a long time has revolved around the patients. It's really created a very unique culture. I remember when I first went there that we were told one of the rules was that we couldn't walk on the road, and we found out that the reason we couldn't walk on the road is that there was a gentleman who was practically blind who liked to drive out to the airport every day, and he did that by there are no sidewalks or curbs, so when his car would go off onto the grass, he would correct back onto the road. So they didn't want you anywhere on the roads. He's passed, so that rule is gone, but it just shows you how and what an interesting culture it is, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Our company has a contract with the National Park Service, and we work on various parks around the state and in the Pacific, and we've done a few projects at Kalaupapa, including some cesspool and wastewater upgrades and solid waste projects. But this project was brought about because a harbor at Kalaupapa is really a lifeline for that community. There are 3 ways to get into Kalaupapa: by sea, by land, which is down a very steep cliff, so impractical to bring materials down, and then by air, and they just have a small runway, so it's hard to get much in by air. So in the summer, they have a narrow summer window when the sea state is low enough to bring a barge in, and barge days are big events in Kalaupapa, and they come, the whole community comes out, and they have all their construction equipment and cars and food, bulk food items for the next year, all delivered in the summer. So definitely a big part of this community. And the National Park Service has taken over operation of I'll call it the physical plant of Kalaupapa now. When I first started going there, it was run by the Department of Health. A lot of the land is owned by Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Now the National Park Service is taking care of the grounds and the buildings, and it will be, or it is, the Kalaupapa National Historical Park, and it will be operated as that when the last patient is not there. The state had done some work on this pier in the past few years all above the water line, and what remained that needed to be done was the pier actually has the work actually has 4 main components. This bulkhead wall that supports this historical community food warehouse. So this is where a warehouse that was used to hold all the supplies that came in. There's a dock here, a low dock here, and the breakwater over here. And I have some better pictures, but just to give you an idea. So here we have the bulkhead wall that's holding up that community food warehouse, the low dock here, the main dock, and the breakwater out here. So the project consisted of repairs of these things, and I'll have some more pictures of that. Also, a number of armor stones had moved from the breakwater into the berthing basin and were causing a navigation hazard. And the other part of the project, so those had to be removed. And then the other part of the project is installation of some mooring buoys along the coast as compensatory mitigation for coral loss, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So here's what the harbor looks like. The community food warehouse and the bulkhead wall here holding that up, the low loading dock, the pier, and the breakwater. And this is Army Corps of Engineers breakwater. Was first constructed in the 1940s and then lengthened and armored and so forth at various times. There were essentially a number of voids that had been formed in this bulkhead wall here because of wave action in the harbor. Now it looks pretty calm here now, but in the winter the seas here are horrendous. And so you might not think, how did all these things happen, or how these stone, a lot of these rocks that had moved into the berthing basin were 8-ton stones. They still moved, and so there was a big void here. A lot of concrete spalling under the pier and along the breakwater. You can see some of the voids here that had formed in the low bulkhead wall, or in this bulkhead wall. The contractor ended up putting about 50 cubic yards of concrete in here. That's how much what the voids had developed to. Oh, and It was a construction site complicated by a lot of issues of natural resource issues. Just on the other side of the harbor here, along here, is a monk seal pupping beach. They're around all the time. It's a nice thing, but it does wreak a little havoc with your construction schedule sometimes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the environmental permitting for this project was extensive. We're doing work in the water, so it requires the Army Corps 404 permit. We're doing work on the Army Corps breakwater, required an Army Corps 408 permit, which we kind of found about a little late in the game. The Army Corps made us go through a lot of hoops, made the National Park Service to go through a lot of hoops to do these repairs on something that perhaps the Army Corps should have been taking care of all along. Then the 401 permit for Department of Health, the Clean Water Act permit. There was also a community noise permit. As you can imagine, construction noise in this setting is an issue because of the quiet nature of the community. A special activity permit for Department of Land and Natural Resources required for the coral take. Essentially, it's a coral take permit. So those are all the permits that we were getting. The harbors here and these seal beaches along here. So this is what the harbor looked like at the start of construction. The contractor brought in a large barge with a crane. They were going to have to be lifting armor stones out of this berthing basin and repositioning them. The permitting requirement was that they use a turbidity curtain here to isolate the major work areas that would be in the water and where grouting was occurring. So that was all in here. So I just thought I'd show some pictures of the breakwater. You can see the kind of damage, structural damage that had occurred. Yeah, the contractor was AMEC, which is actually, they served as the construction manager, but it was Healy Tibbetts. So that's their barge, and Sea Engineering worked with them to do some of the in-water work. Sea Engineering also worked with us on the design side when we were doing the initial design. There was a lot of talk about putting a mooring dolphin out here so they could bring in some larger barges and they would have stability, more stability for the barge. There's a lot of community opposition to that. There had been a mooring buoy installed out here maybe about 30 years ago. The winter after it was installed, it was promptly ripped out by the waves. And the community really didn't want larger barges in here. I mean, they want things to stay the same, and so that idea was scrapped. But there was a lot of wave, we did some wave analysis to look at what size berthing stones would maybe not move around. Of course, everything you do, the contractor has to have precautions for anything not going into the water here. These are all the stones, new stones that they brought in to be repositioned. Yeah, they got most of them on, I think, on Oahu, and they just went to, scoured the quarries looking for big stones. I like this picture. This is I showed there was a void along the backside of the dock. So this is the dock here and the breakwater coming out here. They had placed this stone and then used it to hold up their concrete form where they filled that void. And that's what that area looks like at the end. Yeah, so that was a big issue because, of course, they can only get in there in the summer. They had to avoid the barge days, or the barge day, and they had to avoid the monk seal pupping season. So it gave them 2 months. And they basically worked July and August. So everything was on a pretty fast timetable. We did all the permitting in under a year, which was a push. This is under the dock. You can see the type of concrete degradation that's happened.
There's some people who didn't want any repair work done.
No, environmental assessment was done, and those kinds of things were done. But the National Park Service they have an excellent superintendent over there, and unfortunately he's moving to the mainland, but because he's very well loved in that community, I think, and he just does he has such a wonderful demeanor, and he does a wonderful job of making these decisions inclusive, and which is what's needed in that community. So, not much left to that. It's the kind of damage that was there. They took up the top deck of the dock and replaced it. So getting concrete in here is a little complicated, especially when you're staging things out. So the contractor decided to bring it in by helicopter.
where did the helicopter pick up the concrete at? Outside.
Yeah, topside.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mhm.
Outside.
Moloka'i.
Right up there behind
Yep.
where the trees are, yeah, skyline. There's a quarry. That one.
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure.
Or did they bring in all the nets? That's expensive.
Yes, it is. This is the surface above the bulkhead wall, and they're just pumping concrete down into, they've drilled and they're pumping down through, so you can see this is the bulkhead here. They've put some rocks, some larger armor stones in here, and they're concreting those in. Yeah, so they had divers around to check on things and. Mhm. They grouted all of these in. You can see here that they have some grout in here, and basically they did that for all of these rocks. This again is community storehouses right up here, and they're injecting concrete into this.
That community storehouse, how old is it, would you say?
I believe it dates from the 20s or 30s.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And they don't, I think they're storing some things in it, but other than that, it's not actively used, but it is nationally registered, so on the National Register. So
Located there just because it was easier.
right next to the dock, yeah. So I mentioned that one of the other things we did was install some mooring buoys. This is typically what the seafloor looks like in the harbor, and there are, even though the harbor has been dredged, it's been quite a while, and there is some coral growing there. There were coral growing both just on the harbor floor, also coral on the stones, the armor stones that had moved into the harbor, and there's also some coral on the dock pilings. Of course, because coral's protected, you have to, you can't just disturb them and do nothing about it. So, however, if you disturb it, they're coming to the realization that if you just try to transplant it somewhere, it doesn't really grow very well. Coral really likes the environment it's in, and if you move it even, a couple of tens of feet, it doesn't really grow again. So instead, what the National Park Service proposed to do, they did something called a habitat equivalency analysis. They did they did a big survey, found out what specific coral species were here, and they did an analysis of how they could, if they installed mooring buoys here, protect areas of coral. Prior to the installation of these mooring buoys, small recreational boats would come and dock along here, and they would just drop anchor onto the seafloor and damage coral. So essentially the habitat equivalency analysis was done to figure out how many mooring buoys, given a lot of assumptions about how much coral you would protect and so forth, you would need to compensate for the coral loss. Following the project, they did another survey of how much coral was actually damaged, and worked out pretty well. They were pretty spot on their estimates, and so they came up with a number of 6 mooring buoys. So that was what was installed out here as part of the project. This is what the mooring buoy pin looks like. Essentially, they put this rod, they drill a hole into basalt substrate. And the seafloor here is mostly basalt with coral growth, essentially.
These mooring buoys, are they for construction or are they permanent?
No, they're permanent, yeah. So they install this pin, basically they drill a hole, install this pin, grout it in, and then the mooring buoy can be tied to the ring. It's a little hard to see because it's underwater, but you can see this is a diver down here working to install the mooring buoy. And you can just see the type of seafloor. There's a lot of coral growth here. He's found an area of...
I assume they were old mooring buoys, if so, what happened to them?
No, so these were new mooring buoys that were installed as part of the project.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there old?
No, there were none.
These are the new kids on the block.
Yeah, so people, if you brought a boat into Kalaupapa, you would just drop an anchor and damage coral. So, the idea of mooring buoys is you tie to these instead of dragging an anchor around.
Well, there's Waimanu Canyon.
Yes. Now I just have a few scenic pictures because I just think it's so stunningly beautiful. Beautiful coral growth here. This is
Where is this, the Seal Beach?
over here. Yeah.
Okay.
And further along this coast is the Puffing Beach, yeah. So you can see
That's the only pier.
it is the only pier at Kalaupapa.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing over at Kalawao.
Yes, that's right. There's nothing over here. You know, the other side of the peninsula is over here, and there's nothing there.
That was the original settlement.
That's correct. I love this picture too because it just really shows the rural nature of this community. You know, there's not much there. We had to do a lot of water sampling, as you can imagine, daily samples for a wide range of parameters to meet the requirements of the water quality permit. So there was a very detailed water quality monitoring program that our firm did and the contractor had to follow. They're using basically an instrument called a sonde that they just drop and takes all the measurements you want and then some. So they're not taking samples, discrete samples, and then measuring it in the lab.
Well, if they got readings that were unacceptable, what could anybody do about it?
Well, they would have had to propose mitigative measures. So fortunately, that didn't happen.
At reasonable standards.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some sort of a penalty.
Yes, it could have been. I mean, if you you basically violate the Clean Water Act, which is a $25,000 a day penalty. You know, so the water inside the silt curtain was allowed to be turbid. That's the purpose of having the silt curtain there. So she's measuring on the outside of the silt curtain. And the silt curtain performed very well. They didn't have a problem. Yeah, the water quality readings, they never had a violation, actually, the whole project. So, I don't know if you can see that little monk seal. I now know why monk seals are endangered. They're way too curious for their own good. So here's one that is probably the same one. He's outside the silt curtain and he's thinking that he'd like to go over here. And this picture was actually, this is from inside the silt curtain. So he got in there somehow. And then you got to get them out. And of course, every time they come swimming around, you got to stop construction. And there are there are turtles and dolphins and many things in these waters. So it was a challenge for the construction crew. Oh, there they are going over the silt curtain. It was pretty crazy. This is pretty much at the end of the project, just before the getting ready to get the barges out here. Although not quite ready, they still have everything set up. But you can see the new concrete on the decks and on the.
So the Young Brothers barge ties up pretty much like the crane barge?
It does, yes. Yeah.
About the same size. The regular barge is like that size.
Yeah. And, they did have some days where they had big swells and they had to pull the barges out to sea. That happened 2 or 3 times, I think. Yeah. And that's it.
Okay, very good.
Any questions?
That first slide, the very first one.
That must be in the way.
Wait. Yes, it was.
Yeah, that's right where you were working.
Yeah.
The swell just runs right in there.
But I've also seen waves bigger than that.
You go up and over the bulkhead.
Yeah, you can't stand on the dock.
Where do you guys go on a tsunami?
Actually, Kalaupapa is, I don't think has had too much tsunami damage over the years.
What's the current population?
Well, there are only about a dozen patients left alive. Then there's Department of Health staff and the state, so that's the state staff. There's cooks and nurses and,
When the last
post
patient
office and...
passes away, what is going to happen to the population of Kalaupapa?
Well, I would think that the state workers will be gone, but it will be then, as I said, the National Park Service, I've seen during the time that I've spent there, has been taking over more and more of the responsibility for the physical plant, so to speak. So And they've done a lot of archaeological work, clearing wall. A lot of things were overgrown. Walls were overgrown. Gravestones were overgrown. So they've done a lot of work there on those things. And so it will be a national park. There's been a lot of conversation in the community about how much access. We were talking. I don't think it's going to be like volcanoes where you have 1 million visitors a year, but there will be access. It's just a question. They will control it, and that's there are a lot of stakeholders here, and that's what they want.
Most national parks have a place that people can stay several days. Any plans to have a motel kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure if they have that plan. Currently, if you go to work there, they have a number of houses that they've fixed up for guests, for workers. A lot of the state workers have lived there for a long time, and they have their houses there. But the National Park Service has fixed up some facilities, and I don't know what their plans are in that respect for the future.
Do some workers commute by hiking down the trail daily?
Some do, yes.
They must develop pretty powerful legs.
Yeah, yeah, some do.
They fixed it recently.
Yeah, because for example, you can't. There are no children allowed at Kalaupapa still, and so if you're a young National Park Service worker and you have a family, you live up top and hike down. A lot of people do that.
Does the National Park own all of the property there?
The National Park Service owns none of the It's most of it is DLNR. Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and I think the Park Service may own some of it, but the whole area that's underlain by this community and the pier is Department of Hawaiian Homelands, because we had to do an environmental baseline survey to allow to have the work done.
I think the lighthouse parcel is federal.
Federal, yes, and the airport would be federal.
Airport is state.
Oh, is it? Okay.
You should know.
Yes, you should.
So who owns the pier?
It's Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Not a Corps of Engineers.
Well, the breakwater is the Corps of Engineers. The pier is the state's. Actually, the pier itself may be T. Harbors, I don't know. So anyway, it's very the land ownership is very convoluted.
Yeah, who paid for the project?
National Park Service.
That was a federal appropriation.
Yes.
And then Mooring Buoys?
National Park Service.
National.
Well,
So do they charge people?
yeah. No,
So that's for visitors, people who have a sailboat or something.
that's right.
What do they do about the deer population?
Yeah, from when I have been there in the past doing habitat restoration work, it's a big issue. And in fact, a lot of the work we did over there was we fenced the whole coastal strand because it had endangered plants, and they're just destroyed by the deer. And then an area around where the crater is that formed Kalaupapa, that was fenced for the same reason. Yeah, so the deer are a big problem, and there's a lot of resistance to hunting, or I should say, a systematic program to eliminate them, because people who live there want to be able to hunt them. And but I will tell you that if you stand on the cliffs in the morning and look down, it looks like the Serengeti.
Yeah, that's right. You mean you see deer running around?
Oh my goodness, deer everywhere. And they're running up they move up, they come down at night and then move up into the hills in the mornings.
No, that wasn't true 30 years ago.
Pigs,
And a lot of pigs, yeah.
Yeah.
They get out of the runway too.
Yeah.
They go under the fence and you have to watch out.
Yeah.
Kalaupapa.
And if you're, I've driven the road many times over to the former settlement and where the churches are, and you see pigs on the road.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
They could care less.
Because really, my visits there 30, 40 years ago, you saw no wildlife.
Yeah, it's very bad now.
See, you shouldn't have fed the pig.
Last question.
Anybody else?
The concrete was a special mix, and then what would that? Do they have to do everything at like low tide? And if they spilled any concrete or any debris, I mean.
Yeah, so pretty much the places that they were doing the most of the concrete pour was inside the turbidity curtain, and there was some concrete, especially when you're pumping into the wall. There was some, and you have tidal action even inside the turbidity curtain. So we did specify an anti-washout admixture, so they did that, which helps a little bit. It's specifically made for below water application of concrete.
Okay, folks, good. Janice, we have this certificate of appreciation.
Thank you.
Since 1902.
Thank you. Oh, thanks.
Thanks a lot, Janice. That was very interesting.
Okay, and that concludes today's meeting. Next week, what are we having? Does anyone have the name? Oh, that's right. Next week, no meeting. Holiday, Good Friday. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
What I'll do is I'll put
Meeting adjourned.